So welcome to day 3 of Ethical Consumer Week. We are gathered here today to discuss how banks continue to fund the climate crisis. Rob is going to be hosting this session and he will introduce all the other panelists. So I'll hand over to you, Rob.
Excellent, thanks Anna. Right, hi everyone. We are going to, we've got 4 speakers today. One isn't quite with us and might be joining later, but we've got our first 2, and this is Zoom, and we know that this could work really well. Where's my script? Here we go. Sorry, I'm making a bit of a hash of this. So yes, here we go. It's the October the 26th. Banks and the climate crisis. We've got 4 great speakers here. We've got, yeah, hang on. What's happened to my script? Here we go. Sorry. We've got Ernst Jan from BankTrack. We've got Leslie McPherson, Director of Communications at Co-op Bank. We've got Claire Carlisle, a researcher from Ethical Consumer. We've got Paul Dudman, who's campaigning on coal projects in Bangladesh. With a bit of luck during the course of the call, we might have Tony Newshin, who's a degrowth and climate justice activist, explaining some of the work that she is doing. So, and I think how we're going to run it is that the people are going to speak for about 10 minutes, maybe share some slides. And then after that, you can ask direct questions that go from, that people have maybe raised during the course of it. And then once we go around everyone, then we will have a panel and we can ask questions of all the panelists, and the panelists can have discussions with each other. And that's worked quite well for some of the other sessions that we've had in this week. So I think we're going to start with Ernst Jan. So do you want to tell us what you've got to say tonight?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I have a few slides, so let me try to share my screen, which I guess should be screen 2. I think it's this one. I hope you can see some. And now I should use the. Yeah, it should be like this, right? Yeah, cool. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining. My name is Ernst Kuiper, or please call me Ernst, that's a bit easier. I'm not here to talk about myself, obviously, but you might be interested to know that I studied climate physics at Utrecht University, and after I graduated, I did and finished a PhD in glaciology, which is the study of the ice sheets, in my case, the Greenland ice sheet. And that, well, to be honest, that freaked me out to such an extent that I decided to become a climate activist. So I'm also active in Extinction Rebellion, which you probably know since you're from the UK. So no explanation there, I guess. And since the beginning of this year, I am a climate campaigner at BankTrack. So I'm not on the science side, but on the policy side, if you like. So I have about 10 slides, so I hope I can go through them quite quickly. What do we do at BankTrack? Well, we are a civil society watchdog on the private sector commercial banks. We're based in Nijmegen, founded about a decade and a half ago. And please check our website. It has quite some useful information. Okay, it might not be completely objective, but that's what I think. And our mission is to stop banks from financing harmful business activities, which at this moment means human rights abuse, deforestation, and funding, or I should say financing, of fossil fuels. And to promote a banking sector that respects human rights and contributes to a just society and a healthy planet. So what do we do? Well, we track banks, which is actually most of our work, because most banks are not that open about their unethical financing. That's probably not a surprise for you. So that involves quite a lot of research. We engage with these banks. We go to AGMs. We try to stay in contact with the CEOs or the head of sustainability, etc. We campaign, of course, and we support local opposition to certain projects that banks fund. So in this case, we took the example of DAPL, the Codex pipeline. So that's what we do. Well, enough about BankTrack. Why banks, you might wonder, because I always targeted the fossil fuel industry or the government in case of my Extinction Rebellion activism. But banks play actually quite a key role in this climate emergency or climate crisis, because these banks, they continue to fund new fossil fuel companies or new fossil fuel projects and fossil fuel companies. And we always say that these banks have actually a choice in what they finance, so they could decide not to finance these projects or companies, while many of these companies do not have another choice. They are what they are. A company that is specialized in building oil pipelines is not overnight going to install windmills. That's unfortunately not how the world works. So if we can cut off this financing for these companies, we could, at least in theory, stop the expansion of fossil fuels. And you have to realize that most of these projects that are still being started, they have a life expectancy of about 20, 30, 40 years. So the investments we're making now will keep us hooked onto fossil fuels for decades to come. So the climate crisis, just to go over it in one slide. Well, the Paris Climate Accord, you all know about that one, I guess. It said that we will keep warming well below 2 degrees. And we pursue efforts to limit temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. Now, my little sister is a lawyer, and I asked her once what pursue efforts means, but she told me it doesn't mean anything, basically, at least from a legal perspective. So, and I'm also still confused about what well below 2 degrees means. Does it mean 1.7, 1.6, 1.9? I don't know. But okay, it's what we have to work with, I'm afraid. But in order to get to this 1.5 degrees, there is some kind of consensus that global emissions need to be halved by 2030, or more than halved actually, compared to 2010 levels, and they should reach effectively zero by 2050. Now, I know this science quite well. There is a lot to say and a lot of nuance about this, but this is what most NGOs and also climate scientists are now aiming for. And this will only give us a 50-50 chance of staying below 1.5 degrees. It's no guarantee whatsoever. And just to emphasize that, the IPCC report, the latest one, which was released about 2 years ago, they had one quite a strong quote, I think, and it said that to avoid catastrophic climate breakdown requires rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. Now, for a scientist, these are about the strongest words you can get, more or less, and I'll leave it up to you to decide whether we are actually in a society that is seeing unprecedented changes. So what about banks and financing? So at BankTrack, we track the 35 biggest or largest banks in the world, and we track their financing of fossil fuels, which means underwriting and loans and all that kind of stuff. And what we see is that these 35 banks, so these include the Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, Barclays, HSBC, all of those, that since the Paris Climate Accord, they continue to increase their fossil fuel financing each and every year by roughly 30 billion, which means that if we continue on this trend, we reach about 1 trillion in 2030. So, well, we're obviously heading the wrong way because, as I said, this will keep us hooked on, or this will lock in these fossil fuel infrastructure for decades to come. So that's kind of problematic. And roughly a third of this financing, about a third, is going into new fossil fuel projects. So that's the expansion of fossil fuels, fossil fuel infrastructure, new oil wells, etc., etc. So how about those banks? I hope you can all see this. If not, please let me know. I have to zoom in one way or another. But JP Morgan Chase is head and shoulders above the rest in terms of fossil fuel financing. They finance fossil fuels by about 65 billion per year. And they're still increasing, while at the same time they claim to be aligned with the Paris Climate Accord, which, well, in my opinion, is complete, well, BS. And since you're from the UK, or at least most of you, you might be interesting to know that Barclays is number, what is it, 7, I think? And HSBC is, I think, number 10 or 12 in this list. In Europe, they're the biggest two. Barclays is number 1 in Europe, and HSBC is number 2. And Royal Bank of Scotland is also there, all the way down there. What about these investments, you might wonder? So this is a slide I stole, or borrowed, I should say, from Oil Change International, but I like it quite a lot. Climate scientists always talk about carbon budgets, and it basically means how much carbon can humanity still emit before we reach a certain temperature increase. It doesn't matter where this carbon dioxide is emitted. It also does not really matter when. It's just a budget. That's why we call it a budget. So on the left side, so on the right side, I mean, you see that we have a budget of about 1,050 to 1,100 gigatons of carbon dioxide to stay below 2 degrees temperature increase. But if we use up this budget, can you see my mouse, by the way? I think so, right? Yeah. So if we use up this budget, so if we do actually emit this roughly 1,100 gigatons, we only have a 2 in 3 chance of staying below 2 degrees. Now for 1.5 degrees, this budget is obviously much smaller. It's in the order of 500 gigatons. And that will give us a 50-50 chance actually of staying below 1.5 degrees. And on the left side over here, you see what the current developed reserves are. So that is the current infrastructure, the current oil wells, the refineries, et cetera, et cetera. And you see that it blows the 1.55 degree budget out of the window. And we have a good chance of going past 2 degrees if we use up this, or if we finish these current developed reserves. This means, and this is a very simple statement, that all fossil fuel expansion is incompatible with the Paris Climate Accord. It's that simple. There's no buts, there's no ifs, there's no nuance. All new fossil fuel projects are incompatible with the Paris Climate Accord, at least with a 2/3 certainty, so to speak. I have to go faster. So what are we on track for? So this is the Climate Action Tracker. It's quite a good website. You should visit it, or if you want to, of course. And it basically keeps track of at what temperature we will end up if all governments in the world will do what they promise in terms of climate policies. So at this moment, we are already at 1.3 degrees, which you can see here. 1.5 is what we pursued efforts for in the Paris Climate Accord. But you see that with current pledges, we end up at least 2.5 degrees, and most likely in the order of 3 degrees. Now, I don't want to scare you, but this is not a world you want to live in. The climate science is quite clear about that. This is not a world that is pleasant for our children and grandchildren. So last slide. So basically what we end up with is this. We either start now with a managed decline of the fossil fuel industry, which already means that we have a lot of stranded assets, especially in the coal sector, which is up here. Then we end up at a managed decline, or we continue to increase fossil fuel expansion, or we continue to start new projects. And then we basically have 2 options. We either end up in complete climate chaos, which is not what we want, or these assets become stranded if our governments finally decide to put a brake on the burning of fossil fuels. And I'm still looking for a good source of what the order of magnitudes of these stranded assets are, but it must at least be in the trillions. Of course, it's not this binary. I mean, we already have a bit of climate chaos, but this is how you more or less could see it in a very simplified way. Well, yeah, that's it for now because I've already taken up 13 minutes. So yeah, please leave any questions in the comment box. Then the next speaker can go ahead, I think.
Okie dokie. Thanks for that, Ernst-Jan. I'm looking in the Q&A box, and I can't see anything there. I think, Ernst-Jan, can you mute yourself now that you're not speaking? I think we're just feeding back a little bit. Thanks. I'm looking in the Q&A and I can't see any there. And I'm looking in the chat and I don't think I can see any there, but no,
there aren't any questions yet. Oh, there's one there.
Oh, is there? Great. Oh yeah.
From Sean.
Where's that?
So Sean asks, Ernst, is there a sense of whether the stranded fossil fuel assets are larger than the property or subprime issues from 2008?
I have to unmute myself first before. In my honest answers, I don't know. It's a question I wanted to look into this question. To get an order of magnitude for the 2008 crisis should be quite easy. Should be quite a bit harder to find data on what the size of stranded assets are. But yeah, as I said, it must be in the trillions. But I don't know. That's the honest answer.
Yeah, I can chip in, although I meant to be host and not commenting on this. I mean, I know that the Bank of England itself had spotted this as a structural risk to the UK economy of the same nature, which is why it's been talking a lot about this area, encouraging action. So we know that the formal banking sector is aware of this as an issue. They tell us that it's not a problem, and I guess, or that it's a problem that they have okay, and that the banks are sufficiently capitalised to absorb any losses that they've got there. But I guess I'm not necessarily filled with confidence given the performance previously in this space.
I've heard this story before, yeah, indeed.
There's also another question. I don't know if it's for now or later, but what response do you get from shareholders when you attend banks' AGMs?
Well, the honest answer is that I would have been the one this year to go to most of the AGMs. That was my job or my job description at BankTrack. But due to Corona, all these AGMs were either cancelled or they were held online. So I do not know. I've heard it from my boss, etc. But most of the time you get some kind of media trained answer. The disadvantage of AGMs is that you can only ask one question and they sort of give one answer that doesn't mean anything or is filled with empty promises, and then the next shareholder can ask a question. I've been to Shell's AGM a few times, but that was as a climate activist, so I'm not going to bore you with that. But next year, when Corona is out of the window, hopefully, I will join a number of AGMs.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks very much for that. No, that was. Oh, yeah. Can you hear me, everyone?
Yeah. Fine.
Yeah. Good. Excellent. Sorry, it popped up a thing saying I'm not mute. I'm unmuted. But there you go. So thanks, Ernst-Jan. I'm not covering myself in glory with organising this, but anyway, it's how it goes. So Leslie, I think you're up next. And just before I introduce Leslie, you can see from the sign below there that the whole Ethical Consumer Week, which is looking at the idea of resilience, has been supported by the Co-op Bank, and so we're really grateful that they participated in the wider programme of this whole week. However, Leslie is mainly coming on just to talk about what the Co-op Bank are doing. And I introduce you, I ask you to unmute yourself, Leslie, and tell us a bit about what you're up to.
Thanks, Rob. And yeah, just before we go on, obviously just to say how delighted we are to sponsor Ethical Consumer Week, and to thank you for the invitation to do so and to be part of tonight's panel. I do think Ethical Consumer does play a really important role in raising awareness and spreading knowledge of and understanding of the key issues, particularly the climate emergency. So thanks to Ernst Jan as well. I think that was a very stark message you sent there, and quite unequivocal in some of the urgency around these issues. And at the Cooperative Bank, we do believe there's a role for all of us to take the steps that we can to tackle the climate emergency. I've been with the Cooperative Bank for over 4 years, and I can absolutely guarantee that, you know, during that time there hasn't a week gone by where we haven't had serious discussions about the issues affecting the climate and looked at the actions that we take as a bank to prevent further climate deterioration. At the Cooperative Bank, we realised some time ago that there was actually a powerful link between finance and the environment. We first introduced our ethical policy back in 1992. Our ethical policy is simply a manifesto of all the issues that our customers tell us are important to them. And we translate that into the way that we run our bank. So very much a customer-led bank. One of the biggest issues we know matters to our customers is the climate emergency. So for over 20 years now, we haven't provided finance, funding or support of any kind to businesses involved in fossil fuels, or indeed businesses who impact on the environment more broadly. And actually I was very interested to hear Ernst Jan mention human rights as being a key sort of aspect of climate change. One of our key partners at the bank is Amnesty. And we know that Amnesty are beginning to take quite a big interest in the climate emergency because of the human rights impacts that's having in different countries across the world. So there's a lot of crossover there between human rights and the environment. So something for us all to consider as we take the subject forward, I think. So, you know, to be fair to us as well, you mentioned the Paris Pledge there. You know, I think, as you'll know, Ernst Jan, our bank was the first UK bank to sign the Paris Pledge not to finance the fossil fuels industry. And I think we continue to be the only bank that really puts that into practice in the UK. We're really proud of those credentials. And, you know, we know that it's an issue that continues to matter to our customers. Even in the last 12 months, I can tell you that we've continued to turn down applications for banking from businesses who are involved in the fossil fuel industry in some way. So in the last year, we've turned down 14 applications from different businesses who wanted banking and finance from the Cooperative Bank. But we knew that because they were involved in the fossil fuel industry, that that's not something our customers would want us to do. So we happily turned away their business because it's not something our customers believe in. I think you know, the longer that banks continue to finance fossil fuel dependency across the UK and beyond, the more damage our environment will suffer. And, you know, I do hope that other banks can follow our lead in refusing to provide that type of finance. And really, I just wanted to highlight the customer views that we have, you know, and the loyalty of the customers that we have that continue to support our stance on this is really important to us. So if there are any customers that have joined our seminar tonight, I just want to say thank you for your support, and please be assured this is something that we continue to take very seriously. Our bank is actually carbon neutral, so we've been, you know, net zero for over 12 years now, and the energy that we do use as a bank is all sourced from green energy sources. We also offset that ourselves. So net zero, carbon neutral ourselves as a bank as well. I think the message that Ernst Jan was sending there and explaining very clearly is a very important one for us all. I'm really proud of the part that we play in refusing to finance fossil fuel organisations and those that are closely involved in their supply chain as well. I would urge other banks to follow our lead in taking this stance, and that we should all work together as customers, consumers more broadly, and government and campaign groups to make sure that this is something that is taken seriously as we move forward.
Right, thanks very much, Leslie. I can tell from the pause. Can you mute yourself? Just, I think
Sure.
we've just got a tiny bit of feedback. Yeah, I can tell from that pause that I think you have finished, which is great. I'm just looking in the Q&As and the chat to see whether there are any direct questions of Leslie. I can't see any there. I might ask one myself, which I have to declare an interest here that I'm also part of something called the Customer Union for Ethical Banking, and we're campaigning to keep the Co-op Bank ethical and in a very collaborative way. And I'm just, maybe I could ask the question as to whether you have any plans for campaigning around climate change as an issue. One of the things that all the members of the Customer Union were very enthusiastic about was the way that the bank was a campaigner as well as just a refuser of problem investments. It was also quite active in making its voice heard in that space, and I just wondered whether you had any plans to do any stuff around climate.
Yeah, and Rob, you'll remember that in September of last year, we actually allowed all our staff at the bank, all our colleagues, to take time off to take part in the climate strikes that took place last year. And we were delighted when colleagues banded together and took to the streets of Manchester and other places to do so. We did find it was something that customers really supported us with, which is really gratifying. At the moment, we continue to talk to our customers and to our followers on social media about our climate stance, and that's something we'll continue to do. Absolutely, we ongoing campaign for climate issues and to raise awareness of the need not to finance fossil fuel related companies. So yes, absolutely, it will continue to be a theme for us, and if customers want us to campaign further and more vociferously on it, absolutely we'll do that. So the answer, I guess, is yes.
Great. We've just had another. We've had a couple of questions on that. I think there were two directly for Leslie, and the third one's for the panel. So one says, how are you trying to influence other banks to stop funding fossil fuel projects? And then there's one after that saying, I saw it yesterday, there's a 3-month waiting period for new business accounts with the Co-op. Is this a good sign, or is it a COVID-related problem?
So I'll answer the first one, and yes, so we're a member of UK Finance, which is the industry that brings together all the leading UK banks, and we're a leading voice in that organisation. I think our fellow banks are very aware of our ethical stance on a range of issues, climate change being one of them. So we try to make our voice heard in that regard as well. And what I would say we have seen in the last few years, a couple of other banks beginning to take a stronger stance on this. Obviously, Triodos is one, but also quite gratifying to see NatWest RBS under their new female CEO beginning to make noises about reducing the extent to which they finance fossil fuels. I mean, that's a step in the right direction, of course, but it's not the same as a point blank refusal to bank fossil fuel companies like we do at the Cooperative Bank. So we welcome those steps, but clearly there's a lot more that can be done. The second question, Rob, remind me, was about, oh yes, the waiting time for business accounts. Well, I think that is a good sign, and what I would say is that you'll have seen over the last few years the Cooperative Bank has begun to step forward and be more vociferous on a number of issues. What we do find is that when businesses are looking to join the bank, we often survey them for, why, what are the key reasons why you wanted to become a customer. And our research shows us that time and again, our ethical stance is one of the top 3 reasons that they choose for joining the bank. So that is a really encouraging statistic for us, and one that we hold very dear. Of course, we have a long waiting list for new business accounts. I think that's a combination of a couple of things, actually. It's not related specifically to COVID. It's really because the bank has actually stepped back into the small business market quite strongly in the last couple of years. And as a result, we're attracting a lot more business customers. Clearly, we're doing everything we can to reduce those waiting times. But unfortunately, it's something that many banks are actually experiencing as well. So small businesses looking to change providers, it's where we are, unfortunately, and we're doing everything we can to reduce that time. But I think it's a good sign, right? So something that we're proud of is our renaissance in small business banking.
Great. Okay. No, that's good. That's good to hear. Can you mute yourself again, Leslie? Sorry.
Sure.
We have an open question there, but that's for the panel that we can look forward to later when we have the panel lined up. So I'm checking, and I can't see any further direct ones for Leslie, and so we can maybe invite Paul to come and tell us about some of the work that he's doing. Paul's been campaigning on new coal projects in Bangladesh, and he was standing in as support in case our connection to Germany and Tony and one of the other activists hadn't worked out. And it's just as well that you were here, Paul, because as predicted, that we had a bit of trouble with our other speakers. So let's hear what you've got to say. Thanks.
No, great, nice. Thank you very much, and it's all lovely to be here, and thank you for taking the time to host us. I'll just try and sort of share my screen. I've got some slides to share. Yeah. Can you see the slides? Okay.
Yeah, perfectly.
Good. I'll just switch that into sort of slide share view. Yeah. So okay. So what I would briefly like to talk about today is our work with the Fulbari Solidarity Group, which is which has been active now for over 12 years, opposing a proposed open pit coal mine project in the Fulbari region of northwest Bangladesh. What we have now is essentially a sort of transnational activist group which has been working for over a sort of decade now, opposing the construction of this open pit coal mine, which has been calculated, if it was to be constructed, would lead to the forced displacement in the region of 230,000 people over the proposed lifespan of the project, which is estimated to be in the region of sort of 30 years. It's also been estimated that it would induce increased levels of poverty and sort of crisis in food production within the local area in Bangladesh, and also more widely across the population as well, and would also have significant impact on water pollution and agricultural land in that particular region, which is one of the most fertile areas of Bangladesh. So just to give you some background, this has been a 14-year campaign that we've been undertaking. It was established by our colleague and founder member of the Fulbari Solidarity Group, Dr. Ramana Hashim, who was present in Fulbari during a peaceful demonstration back in 2006 on the 26th of August, when 3 young people were shot dead and several hundred more injured in a non-violent demonstration against the coal mine, in which 80,000 people marched against the proposal to construct the coal mine. Yeah, the miner is now based in the UK, and we've continued to work closely with communities in Bangladesh, as well as developing an international sort of coalition of sort of solidarity groups that as a means to sort of take this forward. The reason we're London-based is that the company that's planned to undertake this mining work, GCM Resources PLC, is sort of currently listed on the London Stock Exchange's alternative investors market, and to continuing to sort of sell shares in the proposed Fulbari project, even though the Bangladeshi government has withdrawn their license to operate and is considering legal action against the company. So at present, they currently have no valid contract for to undertake the removal of coal from the proposed site in Fulbari. So just to give an example of some of the work that we undertake, the picture you'll see here was from a recent green visual that we undertook on the 14th anniversary of the 2006 protest, which has now become known as Fulbari Day. So this was a green visual that was undertaken outside of the London Stock Exchange to demand that the company is delisted from the London Stock Exchange. We also submitted a petition to the London Stock Exchange outlining our concerns and the impact that the proposed coal mine would have on the local residents in Bangladesh. So these are we have a lot more. So the company is continuing to seek memorandum of understandings with Chinese companies, and are still looking to find ways to take the project forward. Although, as I mentioned, they currently have no valid license with the Bangladesh government to undertake any kind of coal extraction work in Bangladesh. We have a lot more resources available on our Fulbari Solidarity Group website, and updated information on the recent protests is also available on our blog, and you have links there to our other social media related outputs as well. And we're more than happy to receive any questions or feedback talking about, in this case, and also on the wider work that we're doing across Bangladesh. Briefly, we're also involved in working with the campaign to protect the Sundarban, Sundarbans, the largest mangrove forest in Bangladesh, as well as supporting protests against other coal mine activity in the country as well. So, as I say, feel free to contact us if you have any further inquiries, and I'm happy to answer any other questions that you might have.
Great, thanks for that, Paul. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons why you guys are on this thing is because we know very specifically from an article that was published in the last issue of Ethical Consumer. We know, I think, that Barclays is involved in funding some of the infrastructure projects that are around or looking to fund some of the infrastructure projects that are around the new coal mining industry in Bangladesh, and that they are one of the targets of campaigners, and it was one of the subjects that we talked about. So I'm just going to have a little look in the Q&A. Did you want to come back on that, Paul, or I was just going to have a little look in the...
That's fine, that's okay.
I'm just going to have a little look in the Q&A to see whether there are any directly for you there, Paul. It says this is presumably for GCN, wasn't it? Can it seek money from any bank in the world, or it just banks, just UK banks because it's listed on the London UK Stock Exchange? Do you want to comment a bit on how banks are involved in it?
Yes, I mean, I think we've sort of certainly, had some success over this period in successfully opposing investment in the project from the banking sector. But I think I think we still have a long way to go in terms of keeping the pressure on the banking and other sectors as well, to ensure that they not only divest from this project, but also from the wider coal-based projects as well. So I think that's so certainly certainly an area that that we're focusing on, I think. So it's...
Yeah, there's just another question popped up there, which may not be directly for you. So we'll leave that, because that could be for the panelists generally, about whether there's a legal action against LSE in that regard. That's a really interesting question. But we'll save that for the panel later.
Yeah.
And I think because we've got our fourth speaker to come yet, and I'm keeping an eye on the time, which there's a small contribution that I'm making here. And so Claire, I think you're up next. Do you want to tell us about your work in this space?
Yes, sure. Let me just share my screen. Hopefully you can see my presentation there. Okay. So I just wanted to start with a quick quote from the latest Banking on Climate Change report. And for anyone that doesn't know, Banking on Climate Change comes out every few years and tracks fossil fuel funding from different banks, as Ernst was saying. So the last year has brought a groundswell of activism demanding banks cut their fossil fuel financing, at the same time that increasingly extreme weather events have further underscored the urgency of the climate crisis. So why is it that fossil fuel financing is so important? How are the banks responding to this groundswell in activism, and why does it matter to consumers? So the first thing I want to say, which is a very obvious point and one that I think we've heard throughout everyone's presentations, is that it's really not just to do with carbon. So obviously when Banking on Climate Change report talks about extreme weather events, it doesn't just mean, the actual meteorological phenomena of weather changing, extreme weather patterns. It's also referencing the impacts that they have on communities, non-human animals and other ecosystems. But fossil fuel financing often also has a more immediate impact, in that many fossil fuel projects directly threaten local communities and habitats. So to start with an example, this is the Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion Project, which is owned by the Canadian government. And if it is built, it will triple the flow of tar sands from the Alberta oil sands up the top to the Canadian coast. And there have been kind of enormous human and other animal rights issues identified the whole way along its stretch, particularly Indigenous rights issues. So in British Columbia, it's crossing unceded Secwepemc territories. The Secwepemc First Nation and Indigenous peoples of Canada has long resisted the project on the basis that it violates their Indigenous rights. They've faced violence and racism from police and the company, and they also say where the camps are being set up for construction workers, Indigenous women are facing a heightened risk of sexual violence. So they have said, a declaration of war has been issued against Indigenous peoples in Canada by the federal government. Canada has announced its ongoing intention to violate Indigenous rights. And in January, the UN actually advised Canada to immediately cease construction of this until land right issues were addressed. So further down, the next circle we can see, that's the Sumas First Nations Reserve. And in June of this year, 190 litres of oil from the existing pipeline spilt over an aquifer that supplies water to this community. It was the fourth spill in 15 years on this First Nations land. The expansion project will also cross one of its sacred sites. So if that then has a spill, clearly it will be completely devastating for this community. And right down the bottom, you can see a third circle. That's where the Tsleil-Waututh Nation Reserve is, and they warn that there'll be an almost sevenfold increase in oil tankers in the Salish Sea, so a sevenfold increase, which will massively endanger the orca whale population alongside many other aspects of their local ecosystem. And despite all these issues, Citigroup, Deutsche Bank, NatWest Group, Barclays and HSBC have collectively provided billions in loans for this project. So the reason that I wanted to mention the Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion Project is because I think it really shows how many of these projects cross a huge number of our categories, from climate change to habitats and resources to human and other animal rights. So when we're marking companies down for funding a project like this, we often end up marking them down in multiple places, not just under climate change. And I think these kind of fossil fuel projects show just how far climate issues intersect with issues of human, indigenous, racial and animal injustice. So how are banks responding? Well, as Ernst said, they are increasing their fossil fuel funding each year since the Paris Agreement in 2015. Globally, they have provided 2.7 trillion, as Ernst said, which is equivalent to the entire UK GDP, to give you a sense of scale. And the Banking on Climate Change report said the private sector as a whole continues to take a position of extreme irresponsibility in the face of climate crisis. When we looked at this, we also similarly found that 94% of retail banks failed to convince us on their climate strategy. So that meant either that they continue to fund fossil fuels or likely that they hadn't set adequate targets yet for emission reductions in line with the 2-degree Paris goal. So this all might seem quite surprising, considering the PR around banks cleaning up their act. Some banks have responded by ruling out the worst sectors, which basically right now means moving away from coal. But when Banking on Climate Change looked at this, they actually found that the trend of divesting from coal was being more than compensated for by the growth in finance for the oil and gas industries. And many have serious loopholes in their policies, even when they widely publicise them. So, for example, HSBC will no longer lend to companies building new coal projects, but it continues to hold investments in 18 of the largest 33 companies behind new coal power plants. So still funding them in this way. There obviously is best practice. There are banks like the Co-op Bank, although this is the only high street example, but other banks like Triodos as well that do have zero tolerance policies on fossil fuel. But the gap between the best practice and the worst practice is clearly huge at the moment. So Barclays, for example, has provided, as Ernst said, financing worth $120 billion since 2016. So what should banks be doing? Well, the simple answer is excluding all funding in fossil fuels now. This means not only kind of in specific extraction projects like the one I was speaking about earlier, but also in the companies behind them, in the infrastructure for that project, and really also in things like the transportation of fossil fuels. And they should also be setting their own goals for emission reductions in line with the Paris 2-degree targets. So why is all this so important for consumers? I think whenever we're asked to give our kind of top 5 or 10 recommendations for consuming more ethically, we always suggest changing banks. One of the reasons for this is that banks can lend 9 times the amount of money that you save with them. So most people in the UK have savings of around £10,000, which means that £90,000 can then either go into clean or dirty investments. So that's huge. And again, as Ernst was saying, these investments have implications way, way, way into the future. You know, new oil well or coal mine is likely to be operating for 20, 30, 40 years. Josie, my colleague earlier in another panel, was kind of speaking about this issue, and she was talking about how do we get to zero, and she was saying, you know, what matters isn't just what something's carbon emissions are right now, it's whether they're taking us in the right direction. We really need to be looking ahead in this way. And the other aspect, again, as Ernst was saying, of this kind of 40-year period is that actually these kind of investments are really economically foolish, because they end up in things that at some stage we're going to have to kind of outrule. So why might consumers also matter when this is all put in the scale of the world stage? When we did our last magazine, we did an interview with Tony, actually, which is how we have links with her, and it was really, really interesting. One of the things that she said was, you know, there is a reason why so many coal projects are now being proposed in countries in the global south. As some early industrialised countries like the UK begin to phase out coal, companies are trying to make the last bit of money from the coal industry elsewhere. You can see that in all these projects, international companies and financiers are involved. That's why it's even more important to raise awareness and talk about the big bank's role. So clearly there's, you know, real neo-colonial issues here around the outsourcing of damage from these projects to other countries, often in the global south, as early industrialised countries decarbonise, and while profits are seen by companies like Barclays and HSBC that are often registered in places like the UK. But also as potential customers of these companies, we're in real position to kind of keep our eyes on the way they behave. I think the last reason that I want to suggest this matters to consumers is that actually it's an incredibly easy action to do. You know, tackling climate change is huge, but changing banks is really, really simple.
Right. Thanks for that, Claire. We're now left with about half an hour from what we call a panel discussion. We've got some questions backed up. When I click on answered, I can see some of the ones which I'm not sure were answered. So I would maybe go back and have a little chat about some of those. And we've also potentially got Romana, I think, who's involved in the Fulbari campaign, maybe joining us on the panel. And if she comes up, then we can maybe talk a little bit more about the Fulbari campaign particularly. But until that point, I noticed that there was a question here for Ernst Jan. It says, so this happened this year, I think. So 75% of Barclays shareholders voted at this year's AGM not to stop investing in fossil fuels. It's democracy in action. How effective is lobbying banks if they're always accountable to their shareholders rather than their campaigners? And I just wondered whether you had any comment on that, Ernst Jan, or indeed anyone else from the panel. Go on, Ernst.
Yeah, I can go first. Well, first of all, I agree with this criticism or question. It is one of the tools we have. It's not the what we call it, the golden bullet, right? Or is that an English expression? Yeah, I think so. Good. I see you smiling. But it is one of the few ways we have of talking directly to the board of directors. It's actually the only way we have that where they cannot basically shut the door in front of your face. Because if you are a shareholder, you have a right to ask a question. But and for some banks it works. For most until now, it either doesn't or has worked to a limited extent. Just to give you one success story, for a Bank of Scotland, branded itself 1 or 2 decades ago as the oil and gas bank of the UK, or in general, I don't remember. And beginning of this year, they announced that they would align their financing with the Paris Climate Accord, with actually some credible policies. So it was not one of these empty phrases. So banks, they can be pushed in the right direction. For the Bank of Scotland, it was quite easy because their exposure to the fossil fuel industry was limited. But yeah, as I also answered in the chat, it's one of the ways we have, and that's why I also joined Extinction Rebellion, so I can do other types of activism as well, which I fairly enjoy.
Okay, excellent. Thanks for that. There was another question. Romana has popped up, so if we've got more questions on Fulbari, that would be great. We just gonna. Oh yeah, hi Romana. We're just running through some questions that we've had for the panel. There were a couple of interesting ones here about. You said, Ernst, you said a slide on the biggest fossil fuel banks. Do you have similar information on biggest renewable banks? I think there's an issue. We know that we have to get banks to stop investing in fossil, but also there's the whole building the other infrastructure side of the debate. It's not just stopping, it's starting, putting it in the right place, isn't it? And do you want to comment on that, Ernst, Jan?
Yeah, my answer is very short. No, we don't. At BankTrack, we only track the unethical stuff, not the ethical stuff. But there must be some NGO in the world who's tracking this. Maybe Leslie knows, but
yeah, I do. Go on.
Yeah, I'm not aware actually. Ernst Jan, I'm very aware of BankTrack obviously playing a key role in the debate, but I'm not aware of anyone that's tracking the positive investments that banks often make.
Yeah, I think there is, and we'll maybe post it up during the course of that. Claire's nodding as well. I'm just trying to remember their name, which is never a good thing to do live on stage, is it? So I would just and in a kind of in a sort of aside to that, if you see what I mean, a kind of follow-up question. There was one about kind of renewable infrastructure like electric. So it's not just generation infrastructure, it's stuff like electric scooters and recharge points for cars and that kind of stuff. And I think that was possibly a question for Leslie and the Co-op Bank about whether this was an area that they were looking at, or whether they were going to do anything around that, or whether you just had any comment on that, Leslie?
Yes, so we bank primarily small to medium-sized businesses now. So we're always looking to attract businesses that have a positive impact to make in the climate emergency, you know, whether it's on a small scale or a large scale. So within our small business customer base, we do have a number of different companies that contribute in a small way. We also have some investments in wind farms and renewables that go back quite a few years now, but again, just show that we were at the forefront of investing in renewable energy, you know, or have been for some time. So yes, very open to applications from businesses who do make a positive impact like that.
Excellent, thanks for that. I'm going through the questions probably in a slightly random sort of way, so keep them coming. But I noticed that so there was a question about Client Earth taking legal action around some of these around the London, against the London Stock Exchange. The question says here, so it's about the legality of continuing to look at these companies, you know, given Client Earth work with the treaties that the UK has signed under fossil, you know, for fossil fuel curbing, and they try and they argue that some of the actions are incompatible with that. And I'm wondering whether that's something that Fulbari campaigners looked at, the potential for legal action against any of the parties that you're working with. You're nodding there, Romana. Do you want to come in and make a comment?
Sorry, I kept myself mute. I got used to doing that. Thank you for letting me in the middle of. I heard Tony's internet crashed, so I made myself anyway appearing, luckily. So in terms of the legal action, I actually don't want to comment on Client Art's current position, because this is something that they didn't want to really make it so public. But yes, we have been, Fulbari Solidarity and Client Art colleagues are in touch for the last few years, but less than a year. But I cannot comment on more than that, because, and you know, those of you have organized this are the experts, that working on legal issues, especially in London, in the UK, and the London Stock Exchange, it's just so mad. They would vandalize our plan even before we could go anywhere near legal action. So I am, as Paul perhaps have already mentioned when he talked, I'm very keen really to take legal action, because I have witnessed the violence. I am one of the survivors of the violence by British mining companies in Bangladesh, and that killings of the three children, and they're not three people, man. 18 years, 13 years, 14 years boys are not just people, they are young kids. And you kill them, and then your company is still, I mean, Bangladesh government has banned the company, right? And your company is still selling share in based on Fulbari coal project. Even the week before last week, on the 15th of October, the GCM, the Global Coal Resources Management, the company who changed their name by now, and they were basically Asia Energy at the time in 2006. From Asia Energy, they have changed their name, Global Coal Management Resources, and now they change GCM Resources. So you get confused by various names. However, this all has happening on the London Stock Exchange, and we have been reporting this for years. You know, we have been making ourselves available in person, available to the London Stock Exchange. They're not taking any action. And so, you know, it's so unethical. London Stock Exchange knows about this. Why should we take illegal action? You know what I mean? It's just so simple that Bangladesh government doesn't have any contact with you. There is no project called Fulbari Coal Project. You don't have any valid registration, no license for business, and therefore just go. You know what I mean? It's so simple. However, yes, we will take, if a Client Art or no other London-based organization can make it happen, we are quite keen. We have already said it in our latest letter to the London Stock Exchange in August. On the 26th of August, we have submitted more documents and have made it explicit that we will be moving forward with the legal action if they are not coming back with an appropriate, adequate response. So all that they have done since the 26th of August is that sending us a letter to the Fulbari Solidarity group email, not to me in person. This was signed by Bank Truck and 350.org, London Mining Network, sort of like 15 organizations. A coalition of 15 organizations have submitted this letter by saying that we will take a legal action. So I was the correspondent. I have been the correspondent, but they haven't written to me. They sent a generic email from Alternative Investment Market saying, "Dear sir, thank you for your email. Hello, I'm a woman. Never mind, I don't mind to be called sir." But then the rest of the email is just so generic, and that's it. So you keep waiting that they will hopefully one day do something. So that's the ethical aspect of London Stock Exchange. And the banks, RBS, Barclays has recently pulled off after long campaign. But there are other banks based in the UK who are still allowing London Global Core Management Resources to keep selling shares. I don't understand it, you know.
Okay, no, that's super interesting, and I'm glad to see that legal action is part of the armory, so I'm having a little look at some of the other questions that are coming up here, and it's really hard to listen to you and read the questions at the same time. But you know, we've got a question about which other banks do you recommend for SMEs to switch to? And I can probably answer that question myself, in that Ethical Consumer has just released, I think this week, its guide to SME banks. The print copy is being distributed, I think, this week, and the online answers have gone up there. I can't honestly remember what it was, but do check our website for the SME banking best buys. I know Co-op Bank are recommended, but there are some others there too. And so I'm looking at some of the other questions that we've got here. Yeah, and I had another point that kind of popped into my head, and I'm conscious that the Co-op Bank and part of the Co-op group historically were very active in funding legal actions in Canada, strangely enough, with the native populations there against the coal sands project, the tar sands project. And so they had a really, they had some significant legal victories and some very important backing from the co-op movement in the UK for those legal challenges in a kind of very weird way. But it was recognised as super important, that piece of work that took place about 10 or 15 years ago now. So here we go. There's lots of stuff popping up here in the. So we've got comments in the chat going. We've got John Elkington suggesting adding a green or red indicator against company ticker names on stock exchanges to indicate their SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, I guess that is, and carbon neutrality status. No, that would be super interesting. I mean, I think you know, one of the perhaps the point, a general point for all the panels here is that, you know, even though we are looking at banks and, you know, as Ethical Consumer put in its last magazine, their lack of a moral compass in this space generally, you know, the banks themselves are owned by other financial companies. You can follow the money further down the tree into the stock exchange, and often into big asset managers, pension funds are the owners of these banks. And I'm just wondering, where Ernst Young and Banktrack, do you chase up, do you go beyond the banks to their owners? And are you starting to put pressure on them there?
No, or at least not since I've been working at Banktrack, which is only since the beginning of this year. But and I guess the reason would be, but I have to ask my boss or director, that if you do that, you actually, the owners of the banks diversify a lot. So there are like 1 million different shareholders. So it's probably quite inefficient to convince them to take steps. While if you just talk to the board of directors, you have 10 or 12 or whatever, mostly men, by the way, in front of you. So that would be my answer, but
yeah, okay.
Yeah, I guess.
No, that's fine. Okay, so I'm looking for questions up the chat. Quite a lot of comments rather than questions. Yeah, I guess there are some really, really interesting comments there. Is it, you know, switching banks is easy and going for an ethical option at the same time. I'm wary about good things being taken up by more powerful businesses. Happens all the time with independent businesses. Is this a possibility for co-op banks as well? I mean, I don't know whether that's a knowing comment or a on the co-op bank's own ownership position. But in a sense, you know, the co-op bank is still on track, and it hasn't really, and the disaster that some people anticipated didn't take place when the ownership changed. And so we were pleased about that, but it is a great risk that the more successful that the business becomes, the more attractive that it becomes to mainstream investors, who can then turn it in another direction if you're not careful. I'm just wondering whether any of the panelists had any questions for any of the other panelists here.
So Rob, I wouldn't mind just commenting on what you just said there in response to that comment there. And what I would reiterate is what I said at the start. And what matters to us as a bank is what our customers think and what matters to them. So in terms of our own position, you know, we will always be guided by our customers' views on issues relating to ethical issues. And you know, I think you yourself would agree that, you know, despite the change of ownership of the bank over the last few years, we continue to be ethical and to be true to the cooperative values that drove us 145 years ago when we were first founded. So I just wanted to clarify that.
No, that's very fair. I'm wondering whether any of the panelists have any questions of each other here, or perhaps
Yeah.
Go.
Why don't you go first?
I just wanted to, I don't know what you have already discussed in between. Sorry if it is not so relevant to that. But I wondered if Ernst could respond to me just by curiosity, and as I'm doing the full body solidarity campaign. I don't know if you know that Bank Track has really played a significant role in this solidarity movement back in 2011, 2012. Bank Track has helped us to create pressure on Asian Development Bank, which was the key bank. Asian Development Bank was meant to give a huge debt loan to the Asia Energy, because the project was happening at a large scale in Bangladesh, and the Asia Energy name was chosen by the company to do more projects across Asia. But our full body solidarity campaign, backed up by Bank Track and also international accountability projects, that made it happen that Asian Development Bank has pulled off. So I wonder if Bank Track has any more plan to help us, because since then, 2012, the Bank Track colleagues who worked with us closely, because it's often like one or two individuals who work closely, isn't it? So when she has gone, I don't know any close contact, you know, in Bank Track. You do sign, if we send a request to sign on a letter, Bank Track does sign, but I wonder if Bank Track does have any other, you know, ways that they can create pressure on RBS or HSBC, the banks who are funding who are meant to fund the project for GCM.
Yeah, well, yeah, thanks. The honest answer is that I don't know. I am mainly, my portfolio, so to speak, is the European projects and banks. And we have quite a new climate team. All of us started at the beginning of this year, so a lot of experience has walked, well, out of the front door, unfortunately. Yeah, just contact us, send us an email. I cannot make any promises. We also have a certain capacity, so we cannot take on every job or project. Yeah, if you or one of the people attending is interested, just send us an email. To be honest, I was answering questions half the time, so I've partly missed the talks, etc. So. But yeah, my answer would be just send us an email, and probably my colleague Henrike is going to take that on, because she is in charge of Asia and that region. But yeah, if we can, we would like to help. we get actually a new colleague in 2 weeks, so this might be something that we could put on her plate.
Thank you.
Excellent.
So Rob, I had a question for Ernst Jan, if that's helpful. So I'm interested, Ernst Jan, in your experiences from other countries around the world. So I think in the UK, we're only beginning to see consumers beginning to ask questions of their banks. So obviously at the Cooperative Bank, we've attracted customers who are, have ethical concerns and are ethically minded. I think there's an opportunity more broadly for people to consider how their banking decisions might impact the environment. I think in the UK, we see consumers increasingly recycling, increasingly choosing ethical brands in other aspects of their life, but perhaps there's still an opportunity to increase that awareness of how a banking decision can impact on the environment. I wonder if there's any countries you can point to where this is much more widespread or much more front of mind for consumers, or any good examples of different countries where activism has helped impact on banking decisions, banking industry.
I was unmuted and I muted myself. The honest answer is again, that we are not that much involved in the ethical part of banking. I hear someone in the background. Yeah, thanks. I know that generally speaking, the European banks are most progressive in terms of restricting financing fossil fuels, and then especially the French banks. There are a few NGOs quite active in France targeting these banks. It might also be because of historical reasons. And the French like to strike in general, so that might also help. But that would, as to my knowledge, that's the most progressive country. But that, in this case, I mean progressive in the sense that their biggest banks, Société Générale, BNP Paribas, etc., have the strictest policies. I do not know that much about the ethical side of banks. I know in my country they're growing rapidly, for example, but I'm not sure how if that's a good example. I'm afraid. I do have actually, if I may, a question for you, because I'm also quite new to this whole business. But are ethical banks financially more stable, you think, and are they as profitable as non-ethical banks, or unethical banks, I should say? I guess this is quite a hard question to answer, but and I was just wondering in general, are you guys registered at the stock exchange or not? Because I can imagine that if you are, then that would be a major impediment, because shareholders want profit. So, but I was just wondering what your thoughts on that is, because I honestly don't know.
Your first aspect first is, are ethical banks more or less profitable than other non-ethical banks? And I don't think it's historically a simple correlation that can be drawn. Actually, I think it's more to do with business models and many other decisions. I think looking to the future, I think consumer demand and also business demand will ensure that ethical banks can be profitable, because increasingly businesses and consumers are choosing ethical choices, and I think if we can raise awareness of how your banking choice impacts the environment and many other aspects of an ethical nature, then I think there is a big opportunity for ethical banks to grow and expand in the UK and elsewhere. And the second question was about shareholders. So the Cooperative Bank is privately owned now. We do have a listing at the stock exchange, but our investors are very supportive of our ethical stance, and indeed that's what attracted them to the bank in the first place. So we're very confident that being an ethical bank and having shareholders can go hand in hand.
Excellent. Okay. Thanks for that. We've got. Sorry, I'm just trying to stop the echo. We've only got 3 minutes left now, or something. No, 7 minutes left, or something like that. And we pretty much. I'm looking in the chat, and I can't see any new questions. I would make a comment myself in that Ethical Consumer has just done its biannual review of the banking sector, and one of the things that has struck us that is interesting is the notion that banks are beginning to try and calculate their exposure to climate risk. So they're trying to look at what are called their tier. So if you ask a bank what its own emissions are, it'll tell you about its photocopier and its people that drive to work. But if it's going to seriously understand what its emissions are and how it's linked to that, it needs to look down at all the projects that it's lending to. And we did a survey a couple of months ago asking the banks where they were at looking at the impact of their lending and measuring it. And I suppose the interesting thing was how few of them thought it was a stupid question. So they are looking at it, and I would say, potentially, around 8% are probably getting a grip on it. But I think the idea that banks are going to have to start looking at all the projects that they lend to, which in some cases can be in the tens of thousands of projects, and in the same way that they keep a tally of how much money they're lending to them, they also need to be keeping a tally of how much carbon impact each of these are doing and what they're doing to manage it down. This is really just a discourse that has started in the last couple of years. And some of the most advanced banks are making a lot of progress. Some of the super ethical niche banks are doing a lot of work on this. Some of the building societies are looking at it too. We've done a little bit of work looking at building societies who are trying to get their head around the idea that all their mortgage customers in their houses are going to have carbon impacts depending on how well insulated their houses are. So are they going to have to add up all the individual houses that they lend people money to buy and work out what their carbon impacts are? And although that might seem like a crazy question, I think lots of them are beginning to realize that this is where the future lies, in actually measuring this stuff properly and convincing people that they're managing it down. And so, for the very geeky, there's masses of interesting data in the recent Ethical Consumer Report that really looked at this stuff. But we found it encouraging the degree to which that this is becoming part of a mainstream discussion inside the industry, rather than just a kind of slightly bonkers outlier, which it has been for a little while. So we are now. There's just a last question popped up there. Ethical consumer banking guides. Whoops! Oh, it's gone. I don't know. It's been a really great resource. Are there other ones in other countries looking at this? I think was what it said before it vanished. And the answer is, other than the work that Ernst Jan was sharing, which looks at the carbon. So we know that people are ranking banks in lots of other countries against a range of indicators. I think Ethical Consumer probably has the most sophisticated one, or complex, if you like it. We're ranking them against lots and lots of indicators. But we are seeing a kind of tendency towards trying to put this kind of ranking information, how they're performing on a range of things, into consumer sectors globally. So I think we should probably stop taking questions now on account of the fact it's 2027, and we're 3 minutes away from where we were going to end this discussion. Anna has popped up, possibly to kind of do some signing off stuff, and you could say all the right script about what we're meant to do at the end and all that sort of stuff. Is that maybe why you're there?
I just wanted to remind you that someone asked about investments in renewable energy projects, and you couldn't remember the resource, but if you do remember it later, could you put it in the forum? in the session section so that people can go and look at it after?
Yeah, that's a good reminder. There is a kind of forum up on the Ethical Consumer Week website, where we've been kind of posting things that we can't remember into some of these sessions, and that would be a good place for that one. You know, again, it's one, I think the one is just of very large banks globally, and so we're really interested in kind of rolling that out across some of the smaller sector banks. So everyone's beginning to say thanks. What an appreciative audience. I'm sure you would be applauding if we could hear it, something like that. And so I would say thanks to all the panelists for attending. You've been great. Thanks to the Co-op Bank for the wider sponsorship of the conference, as well as attending tonight. Thanks for Romana and Paul, the kind of jumping in when we had tech problems connecting to other people involved in your campaigns. And thanks to all the panelists for coming. I think we have feedback sessions going out at the end of the week. Do see if there are other interesting things that are going on in the week. We're going on until Friday with many more interesting sessions. No, I don't mean more interesting. I don't mean more interesting than this, but also interesting sessions. So there you go. That's my final stumble to say goodbye to you all, and have a good evening, and thanks for staying so late.